The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below. Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor, Thomas Goss, welcoming you to the 11th compilation of website subscriber evaluations for the 2022 Orchestration Challenge. And just a quick note, as I mentioned in the last video, I decided to spread 14 entries over 3 videos instead of squashing them all down into 2 videos, like 7 entries each. I just felt it would run a little too long. So, anyhow, let's start off here with Nicholas's entry. And I just want to say that all of these entries have a certain kind of integrated quality. Like, just things are really nicely put together, and they kind of all work together in ways that make a sort of a cohesive, coherent kind of a whole, with one little exception, and that is a very splashy score right in the middle that has a lot of different approaches and different kind of styles all kind of mixed into one. But we'll get there, right? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's check out Nicholas's score to start off with. And Nicholas, I thought that, I wouldn't expect anything less than a wonderfully playable score. So, you know what? I might mention a few little ins and outs and question one or two things, possibly a couple of errors. Like I think right in here, this is supposed to be a written D third, right? Not an F sharp third. Like you can kind of hear the flaw in the way that the harmony, the parallel harmony works right in here, and also. Right here is supposed to be da-da, right? Ba-da-da-da, ta-ta-da, rather than a tied G here, right? And E here. Sounding A and then F sharp, right? Anyway, all that aside, let's talk about, what worked, why it worked, and talk more about proportions, right? So, my big question about this opening section was that if you only have 10 bars, in this case 20, because you divided it into 3/4 rather than 6/4, if you only have that much time in which to introduce a theme, to make a point, and everything else, and it is at a slower tempo, Would there be a possible risk that it'll sound kind of static if it's the same approach all the way through? Just that things kind of don't seem to have that much motion to them, have that much flow. And there's also an added concern about the pitch weight being in the upper middle register of the piano, very similar to how the last year's entry of Faya's Andaluza started out. And and yet, like this part of the piece is about twice as long as the Andaluza, the opening of the Andaluza, right? So that's an added concern. So, but the biggest concern is that that there is some kind of emotional progression in here, which is usually expressed through a variation of treatment in the different instruments, right? So that would be my biggest critique for you here, is that it pretty much, once you've got instruments that work, you stick with them all the way through, right? So you've got the octave melody being played in oboes, is all perfectly fine, and then here you telescope, like the telescope could go up, like you could go, instead of going down like this, since you already have plenty going on there, you could have the two oboes go up to here, since you're going to go a due anyways, right? So you've got that, you've got these octaves, and you've got the flutes doubling the top of that octave, and then you've got the clarinets below, and they pretty much stay in their courses, right? There's like no change. There's a couple of really clever things, like right in here you swap where the voices go. Now, that probably doesn't make a whole lot of a difference, but it just provides a slight variation of color, if anything. But if the players are really, really good and really, really in tune with each other, you won't hear a thing, right? But you still get you'd still get the effect of the slur across the voices, right? Which is, that's such a cool romantic idea, or idea from the Romantic period, right? And you get away with it 4 times. So I think that it works perfectly fine. And then, of course, the bass clarinet below, holding on to some of those extended notes, and then following along, and then that little touch of tubular bells. So, I mean, does all this work fine? I mean, I think it does. I think the English horn coming in here is great. I think so long as the players play sensitively, then you can stack 3 and even 4 wind players on this, but it really does start to sound wind bandish, I've got to say, towards the end. Right? I mean, there's no strings in here, there's no brass, no harp, right? It just really is focused in on those winds. And I mean, to a certain extent, is there too much weight on top? Do you really need 2 flutes plus oboe? Would it be enough just to have a single flute plus the oboe, and you get a kind of a crisper, more radiant character there? Then like when you add flutes together, right? It kind of gets a more breathy sound. Like the sound of the breath starts to get stronger because the volume, like the volume of the flutes doesn't increase, but the sound of the breath increases, right? Like the intensity of the flutes increases, but that's not the same thing as volume or projection, right? So I think you probably could just save yourself a whole lot of hassle here and just keep the line really light by just having a single flute doubling the first oboe, and then here you could just drop this second flute here, and then just have both of the instruments, right? Just have those same 2 instruments continue to hold. Yeah, and like no problem with English horn and a second clarinet playing this little duo right in here. Yeah, I mean, that all works fine for me. And the tubular bell clang is very cool. Another thing I would mention, that in addition to sort of lacking any kind of variation between any sections or colors, there's also a lack of dynamic variation. Right? If we look at the original score, there's more going on. There's a crescendo right in here, and there's kind of more shape to it, implied diminuendo, and I mean, I like the way everybody lets go and lets the tubular bell continue down that continue to hold, and if you do hit this at a forte, like maybe even an accent, it will continue to hold all the way to the end of this bar, right? If the conductor isn't dragging, so you will get that sound kind of really alone by itself, but without any diminuendo, down to a fine point here, then it's really going to feel like a cutoff, right? Rather than a smooth connection to the sustained sound here. Now, jumping forward, actually, there's kind of one other thing that I just wanted to say to you, Nicholas, and that is, if you're going to put this much work into your score, I mean, and it's all crushed together because I've changed the staff size and so on, and were I to evaluate your entire score, I would do things like, take out the celesta and the harp and the tubular bells, say like right in here, and then immediately you get much more vertical space. So yeah, so I would definitely go through and make it more legible. But here I'm saying, were I to evaluate your entire orchestration, man, you put a lot of work into this. I mean, I wish that the guidelines allowed me to, right? I would really like to do that. So so please, just like, I mean, if it is worth it to you to support a little on Patreon and get, just for a limited time, for like a couple of months, like the month of the month that you enter, and then the month following, then I would really love to give you all the feedback that I can. Okay, so so going on, like here we have the 6/8. All right, and here you're saying quarter note equals 126. Shouldn't you be counting dotted quarter notes, right? Which I think would be more like 188, right? If you were to, I'm trying to do the math in my head really quickly, but you asked me to evaluate your orchestration rather than to do math on the spot. So yeah. Nicholas, I'm just not in love with the way that you changed the previous page to 3/4 time from 6/4, and here I think this whole 6/8 rather than 12/8 is really unnecessary. It's especially the kind of thing where you have to consider that you will be giving this score someday, possibly, to a conductor to perform it, and maybe that conductor will be somebody who's very familiar with the original, maybe even have played it when they were a child or a pianist in another life. So maybe stick to maybe stick to Barvinsky's idea, because the other thing too is that when you change this to a 6/8, you're asking the conductor to conduct in 2, right? So 1 2 1 2, and then you lose the whole sense of a middle bar, right? Like 2/4 is not, 4/4 is not 2 bars of 2/4 stuck together. Okay, the third beat has a different feel than the downbeat, right? And you take that away when you do this. I just think it's completely unnecessary. All right, and what's more, I think it would actually hurt your score, like were you to try to get it performed, right? I think it's a mistake. But anyways, all that aside, let's just check out like how you scored this. So we've got a fairly a fairly deliberate plan right in here. We've got violins and octaves. I should say divisi, right? Same thing with your, especially how low you're going here. There's no way to play that other than divisi. This you could, this you can't, right? So absolutely has to say divisi here. And that's all good. It's like, once again, there's like not a whole lot of variation. Parts winding in and out of other parts and trading off and things like that. And I mean, you're an old hand at this, Nicholas. You've been around the bush a few times with this, with these challenges, and like listening to others and listening to my evaluations and hearing my particular opinions about certain things. You got to know that I'm going to call you on this low second flute right in here, right? I mean, yeah, if everybody is really playing softly, then great. But like there are so many other instruments that could contribute meaningfully to this lower part of the octave, and not just get completely buried and swallowed up by the lower divisi first violins. Like it's like here you have the first flute contributing beautifully to the upper line, right? Just absolutely terrific. It just has this beautiful, like slightly hollow quality, right? It's just like the flute adds a slight hollowness to the strings, but at the same time the strings are warm, and that slight contradiction creates just a beautiful image in the listener's mind. But the second flute being so low, it is so soft and is so easily devoured by the lower divisi violins. It contributes almost nothing, right? So I mean, it might be fun for the player to play that lower line, but in all honesty, it would be better to give it to the English horn, right? Well, of course, you have the English horn doing a different function, but you know, you could also have, you could have given it, like, this could be a second oboe part, and this could be a first oboe part, right? This lower line. So yeah, I mean, I was really surprised at how many people continue to score, like in octaves like this with the second flute playing really, really low, and then in other areas, like in other functions, other contexts, we're also giving a lot of responsibility to low flute, which would just be buried by the texture, even in a soft texture like this. So yeah, just the message not getting through, or maybe you don't believe me, or anyway, just like throwing them this low E here, it's got to be a better way. Okay. All right, so I'll get off of that soapbox and on to a different one. So here, so this is a literal transcription of the left hand of the piano part, where it has little rests. But why are those rests there? The rests are there so that the left hand can reach over and grab the thirds that are part of the middle voice. So when you leave gaps like this, then it just interrupts the flow of what the other instruments are doing, right? So why not, why not make this into an E, right? Why not make this into a D that we're sounding right in here? So that the flow can continue and you don't get this da-da, da-da kind of thing, I mean, it's just to not interrupt, right? To just keep the flow going. And here, like, you fill in the hole, right? Which is great. But why does there have to be a hole here or there? Right? Couldn't this whole thing flowed better? And that's another strong argument for staying in 12/8 too, right? Because like when you have all these extra bar lines in here, it divides things and it makes things seem like they're going to be smoother than they are, but they're not, right? This is lovely right in here. This whole idea in here with the bass clarinet and the English horn, these little notes here in the oboe. That's just it's a nice individual way of approaching this. But really just better to keep the harp as a nice flowing continuous line if you can. Yeah, I don't think you need to go mezzo forte on the double bass here. Right? I think piano is a good universal dynamic. Bass clarinet doesn't have a dynamic. Except for harp, I would mark mezzo forte. Right? So reverse this, right? So this pizzicato is going to come through beautifully in your double basses. It does not need to be mezzo forte. The way that it is scored, literally, it would just go doom, doom. You know what I mean? It would be way louder than you think. Maybe in the mock-up it sounds great, but screw the mock-up. It's, by hitting this extra loud, you're basically killing the harp part and the sustain from the pizzicato here, unless they really, you put in secco here on this rest. Will also eat up what the other low stuff that's going on in the harp. You're saying harp 1. Like, I'm just going to check something here. Here, let's go down. Oops. Sorry, guys. Yeah, so there's only one harp, right? So you don't have to have one on the harp. Maybe you used a template where there were 2 harps. Anyway, okay, so So those are my thoughts on the beginning here, and then like the progression here to mezzo forte just seems a little sudden, right? Just suddenly you're at mezzo forte with your winds, and where does that leave the rest of the winds? Perhaps you forgot to write in the dynamics there. Could there have been a more gradual approach to this, right? So rather than when it goes to the high note being quite such a slap in the face, da da da, right? And then here, are we getting softer as you go back down, da da, or are you just really really keeping it loud? This is cool right in here. It muted everything, muted trumpets and horns. Yeah, so that high F sharp, B flat trumpet. I'm not totally in love with that. I think it's going to stick out way more than you think it is. And since you have, to an extent, you've got that same pitch happening here in your first clarinet, and it'll be at mezzo forte. Do you really even need this up here? Could I mean, I just feel it's a little too much, right? You can mark it piano, but it'll still have a very kind of a penetrating quality. And to make matters like worse is that with that added weight on your clarinet part here, that kind of takes away how the oboe is working here, right? So and the top first violin, and I really don't think you need to go to Divisi in 3 here. It would be better for your violins to just be playing in octaves here and to let the rest of the instruments take all the harmony, right? Then you get that beautiful kind of soaring sound, right? If all of the violins are really sitting on an octave, then it sounds as if they're playing the other harmonic pitches around them, right? The trick is usually that the octaves, or at least the top note of the top pitch of the octaves is the top note of the harmony, right? Or the melodic note. So I just say, there are a few basic things in here. I mean, you are a fine orchestrator, Nicholas, and I just felt there were just a few things in here that I was, I felt that, I was, not to say like I'm expecting you would do better or anything like that, but I just was a little, I felt that I know that you are really a capable, craft orchestrator. So, yeah. Think about it this way, all right? So if you're not going to enter the orchestration challenge as, like let's say you do what you did here, like you orchestrated all the way through, but you didn't want to support on Patreon or it's not that isn't a reality for you this year or whatever. Okay, so that's all good. Nobody has to do that. Doesn't make anybody's contribution more or less valid, right? This makes no difference to me. However, I would say put more work into the front end is all I would say. It's just like there are a lot of things, like little bits and pieces, low, second flute scoring against a more complex texture, dropped, left out some dynamic markings on certain instruments, and so on. Perhaps a better dynamic plan required, right? Things like that. Possibilities. If this is all that you can give me, right? Shouldn't you make the front end of it as spicy as possible, so like I can give you as much feedback as possible on your orchestration style, right? Like, not to say that like this doesn't work. It's beautiful, right? It's gorgeous, but is there a missed chance here, right? Because I really love getting a score from you, Nicholas, and like you sometimes send me scores on the back channel, and I'm so busy most of the time I can't really listen to them and comment on constructively on them. But this is our chance to really be together on this thing, right? So think about some of those parameters. So You know, what twisty, intriguing, fascinating scoring can Nicholas Kingman throw my way in these challenges? I just, just let me know how I can get into the DNA of a really complex, really rich kind of imaginative kind of scoring, right? That I can help you the most with. And also just check for things that I'm just going to comment on, right? So that like maybe even if you feel that it's the right thing to do, maybe try a different thing so that I can constructively comment on a particular idea that you might have in mind of how to score something. Okay, so as one orchestrator to another, that would be my comment on this. All right. But look, I mean, everything works, and like, these other pages, there's so many great things. Like, I just feel really bad about not being able to comment on, right? So yeah, I would just really love to evaluate this stuff, and especially like the climax. Wow, it's one of the best climaxes that anybody sent me, but I can't say anything about it. All right, anyways, all that aside, you've been my buddy on social media and in the group, and just really helped out a lot of people with constructive comments and feedback and insights and resources, and so I really appreciate getting this entry from you, and to keep the conversation going between us, because you just are a really gifted orchestrator. And oops, I keep forgetting that is selected. So anyways, thanks so much for participating, and I really wonder how you will approach next year's challenge. Will you even want to do it, or will you just like send me something that's incredible and over the top and amazing, or whatever. So I look forward to that, to seeing what will happen. Okay, but great job. And now let's look at another nicely integrated, lovely form of a piece, of an entry, of an orchestration in our next entry. Nice work, Max. Yeah, there's just so much fun stuff going on in here. I love the way that you start off here with this little horn and trumpet chorale. And yeah, you don't have an octave melody here, but you still maintain the identity of the sixth chord, right? It really does feel like that kind of um, floating impressionistic harmony. And yeah, and then you supply those little bits of harmony from below in your fourth horn. I mean, kind of, looking at some of this scoring, I almost feel like you could have organized it with like 1 and 2 here, and then 3 and 4 going on, right? And then joining back with 1 and 2 afterwards, just to kind of keep the pairs together, right? And then then right in here, you can have the second continue on these pitches here with the third, right? And then come back in here with the second, and then just kind of keep the pairs together, right? Same thing here. Then like when this happens first horn comes in, and then this part would be the second, and that part would be the third, right? So that, or actually, no, this would be the third, and that would be the second. But yeah, but just to like keep the pairs together, because I think you get better intonation and better teamwork, right? The intonation should be perfect from any group of professionals, but just like the sense of teamwork and the sense of just absolute perfection of articulation and everybody working together. I think it's just better between first and second in pairs and 3 and 4 in pairs. I know that Ravel is constantly doing this. Like he's got close harmonies, and he'll have horns 1 and 3, and he'll go on and on like that. And I love Ravel. I think he's a fantastic orchestrator, but I just think 1 and 2 are much more intimate. Here, this is great. Crescendo to mezzo forte and back to piano. Okay, that's great. But this one is completely unnecessary. Right? Now this is fine. Piano, crescendo to mezzo forte and back to P. But here, we know, right, that a mezzo piano crescendo, you're going to get sort of up to mezzo forte or whatever, unless you really push them, right? So I don't think there's any need to put a mezzo forte in the middle there. That would be sort of the default presumption, is that, and also too, like when you over finesse like this, there's a tendency for the player to kind of assume that you don't trust their ability to blend with the other instruments. They'll be fine. They may actually start off here at piano and crescendo to mezzo piano in order to not wipe out what's above them, right? Because like here you're having, everything's great. You're starting off piano, crescendo to mezzo forte, back to piano, and then here you bring in your winds above, right? And then like it doesn't quite balance out until you get to here. Like here you've got your brass stronger than your winds, like on the outsides of this nuance here. And that's kind of weird, I gotta say. There's nothing stopping you from just keeping everybody at piano crescendo a little, get rid of anything in between here, and then just leave your winds the way that you've marked them here, and then have a listen to it in your mock-up and see what happens. I think you'll see just an immediate improvement. The clarity of the winds right in here will be striking, right? So if we assume that it's still at piano, then this all makes perfect sense. All right. Yeah. So and as far as the rest of it goes, it's like I said, it's integrated scoring. It gets fairly intense right in here. So it's really, really rich. There's a lot of doubling of different parts. The English horn and your first trumpet here and so on. There's just a lot going on. But for the most part, I think it'll work pretty well. Yeah, and the A clarinet's right in there, and that all works fine for me. Yeah. Could there be like any diminuendo, rather than just holding them at piano? Could they fade out a little bit, so that this is a little bit more solitary at the end? It's just a thought. All right, so now getting into this beautiful, rich part in here, I thought there were just a bunch of great ideas right in here. I like the finger tremolo in here. That is a cool idea. I like the combination of muted cellos and bass clarinet, sort of handing off here on the figuration to the clarinets, and I love the harmonization there, and the changing places and everything else. It just is such a great idea, of keeping that going. And then here you have like the little syncopated bassoon notes right in here, along with the harp. I don't really think that the harp really plays much of a role here. Like, I don't know, like, once again, like there are some balance things where like the too many pains are being taken, right? Like, for instance, pizzicato and mezzo forte when everybody else is being piano, right? That, for instance, I'm seeing that in a lot of scores. So, like, right in here, like, I don't see the need for the bassoons to be pianissimo, right? I don't see how that really helps anything. Maybe you're thinking, well, they'll be able to, add some support to the cellos and the bass clarinet without getting too loud or whatever. But but then, like, if they're still pianissimo by the time they get to the end of the bar, then that really doesn't support anything else, right? So I'm of two minds about this. And then then the whole thing about just also that being played in the harp, which will tend to get swallowed by all of this rich middle register scoring. That is where I kind of I just really am not so sure about how that, about the, I mean, at the very least, the harp part should be, like, if you're talking about who to boost, it's really the harp, right? Right. I think the bassoon could be piano, and I think the harp could be mezzo forte, and it wouldn't hurt anything. All right. And then, as far as the solo violin part is concerned, I mean, it's gorgeous, but there are like zero nuances until you get to the mezzo forte, right? So, like, it's just da 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 da. It's all mezzo piano, right? Mezzo piano is really a dynamic that should be on the way to other dynamics, right? Rather than a place to start, right? I don't know. I mean, I think that, like, if you wrote piano in there, the solo violinist would still be louder, right? They'd want to play out, but that doesn't mean that they would still play in like a piano style. Like they have a, like, when they're playing solos, they have a whole different idea of what the scope of piano is, right? So in practical purposes, you could easily write this piano, and you could add nuances in there, a little bit of push here and there, a little bit of pull there, just really giving us some crescendo and diminuendo in there that, like, makes sense with the overall arc of the melody. And then this push here to the end, forte, see, that is a really nice balance with everything else that's happening. I heartily approve of the general strategy going on here. All right, well, before I get ahead of myself, though, there is one other thing, and that is, do you really want these all separate bows? Down, up, down, up, down, up, down is probably how it would be played. But, your violinist might be saying, hey, buddy, can't I put in some slurs on there? And they might just put them in without you asking, because they really want things to be beautiful. And you say molto legato, and you're giving them all of these separate bows, right? Right, so molto legato should really mean, just really, I mean, you can play legato without putting in too many slurs, in which case, there's the change of bow is played in a really legato style. So it almost, like, when I'm playing it, or, when I used to play, it would almost be like almost like a circular motion of the wrist, as the bow changed direction. When it got all the way to the end, towards my left, and then almost circular in the way that I would change the bow direction with my wrist, and that would keep it from feeling like the bow's direction had broken, right? Had changed. So, yeah, but just more legato, right? If you mean legato, write in more slurs. I mean, you've got lots of slurs in everybody else's parts. Right, and then right here you could drop down to A, but then you let go of the chance to play an up bow here. Yeah. Anyway, and then that's all stacked on top of tremolo in everything's muted below, so that's really great. You've got muted firsts, and then, like I said before, this like a finger tremolo reinterpretation of what's going on in the violas in unmeasured tremolo. It's a really cool idea. I like the way that you've organized the material here. It was very, very neat. I don't know if you need to go Division 3 here. When you're getting kind of a big, really complicated stuck together sort of a voicing down there, I think you sort of rob the middle of its openness. If those pitches are already being expressed higher on, like higher in higher places, then then that's actually more like Barvinsky, isn't it? You know, um, except that he really, he does walk down to these pitches right in here. Yeah, yeah, but maybe you don't need to express everything that's in the piano score, right? Anyway, perhaps the harp part could be better, could be better interpreted more with just big rolled chords, and they just leave out this dun 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 kind of idea. Yeah. All right. All right. So to now talk about how things are progressing, the middle voice thing happening here in bassoons, then an octave higher in clarinets. That's very very cool, and I like how you're not totally married to it, right? You don't have to have the clarinets repeated over and over again. You just had a little bit here, and then it's pretty much the bassoons bailiwick from then on, right? And see, I think this is a little bit more effective right in here, like this push that you've got here, this dun 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 dun, this syncopation right in here. Yeah, and this nice kind of open scoring in here. That's all really beautiful. Just like a big, you get a gorgeous color right in here just by carefully spacing out where the different pitches go and so on. Yeah, pretty low scoring though on that fourth horn, going all the way, sounding this same D. Yeah, but I mean, at least you got it doubled, right? The doubling from the double basses is going to help stabilize the fourth horn on that low note. So yeah, so that's all good. Yeah, and then pushing towards here, like this is just barely going to work, right? The minute that you pushed up to mezzo forte here in the horns, that's when things get a little dodgy. But if you have a solo violinist in there who is really worth their salt, and their part is really like an individual part, like, I almost prefer to see this. Do you know what I mean? Right, so like the conductor can really see that the part is separate from the string section and everything else, and that it'll really need attention. Now, of course, you don't have to write solo over it because it is a solo, but I mean, it'll probably get the eyeballs on it from the conductor if they're conducting it. Yeah, I mean, so this is just a really pleasant, beautiful score, and there's so many cool things about it. Yeah, you really are trying to keep everybody just very backgroundish. Yeah, muted horns, distant double reeds. Yeah. So pretty cool score. I think it's okay to expand outwards here, upwards, and to not make the middle harmony quite as rich as it is scored in the piano score, because I feel that with that the more weight that is stuck in the middle of the orchestra, then like the more powerful the overtones try to cancel out the solo violin part above it, right? Anyway, but like having said that, I mean, you know look at the score to the Sibelius violin concerto, for like just how dense some of the middle register scoring can get, or the Brahms for that matter, or even some bars of the Tchaikovsky. So no reason why this couldn't work, just so long as this roll doesn't get to be too loud. But yeah, but I mean, really cool score, man. It's just really great, like to start with Nicholas and then to come to this violin concerto too, and then like the next one, which is going to be really just blow our minds. So thank you so much for this. All right, let's take a look at that next one now. Okay, Brandon. Well, that was wild. Like, I mean, I don't mean to tease or anything, but I mean, it's sort of, I can't tell whether certain things happening in this score are deliberate or whether they are intentional, or, I mean, but then some other things don't quite add up in terms of balance, right? But then, like, then you have, you know, um, this diminished fifth right in here, like, proceeding into the into what should be kind of more pure harmony right in here, where things wrap up to E minor. So yeah, it's just kind of a strange mixture of things. I'm just wondering if some are intentional, some are not, or you got a little mixed up on something, or it's just really hard to tell. So you kind of threw me for a loop with this, but I should be able to evaluate just about anything, right? So so, just a few things, okay? I'm going to teach you a little something about how Sibelius works, all right? Now, I think we might have had this conversation before. You might have actually seen me mention this in somebody else's evaluation. All right, so I've selected a note here, glockenspiel, all right? And I'm going to press my thumb down on the Command or Control key, and then I'm going to touch the E key as my thumb is sitting on that Command or Control key, and I get the little blinking cursor, right? Now I'm going to leave my thumb sitting on, like, the easiest thing in the world. I'm just going to leave my thumb sitting on that same Command or Control key, and then just reach over with my other finger and press F. And then see, I get a beautifully engraved forte mark, as opposed to just this kind of skimpy, undernourished kind of a mark. See how easy that is? So I want you to just go practice that, all right? After you watch this evaluation, and anybody else, like working with Sibelius, it's just a real easy thing. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to not worry too much about the harmony. Except for where it just really, kind of might affect the texture. And I'm just going to try to show you, like, how things could work better or worse or whatever, okay? Okay, so you start off, I think, actually pretty well. You have flutes in here, you have English horn, and you've got some light strokes here on the timpani. And we got some vibraphone in here. You're trying to balance things out, right? So you're telling everybody to play softly, except for the celesta and the vibraphone. And like I would say, I think forte is a little bit too loud. So I think if you're going to have piano in your winds up here, and, they are actually playing in fairly soft registers. At least as you start to approach this middle register right in here for the middle register for the and lower register for the flute. I would say maybe mezzo piano or mezzo forte on all of these instruments here, okay? But not forte and piano, right? So, like, you can tell it's just the harp is really underpowered here. And then you have double bass really low, right? So the effect that you're setting up here is, like, there's a lot of bell kind of percussion in the middle range. And we have kind of more kind of thuddy sort of pizzicato. Excuse me, I'm trying to do three things at once here. You have more of a kind of a thuddy, more punctuated timpani and double basses below. Now I have no problem with there being, like, kind of a bass line down here, because I already talked about the concern of the pitch weight being in the upper middle register of the piano for this first, this entire opening here. So, you really do address that with some of these low pitches, maybe a little too low sometimes. And you keep things from sounding too static. You have a lot of emotional and timbral development. But does it add up to a cohesive emotional statement? Like, how are the emotions connecting throughout? Right, that's something to think about as you're going through this. And I don't want to make this like an hour long, because there are a lot of things to fix in this. It's the kind of thing where really, you sitting down with a teacher who has more time to really like work on things with you, like say maybe somebody from the from our orchestration teacher list on the orchestrationonline.com website. So yeah, so you've got this right in here, and then you sort of trade over to strings and winds, and like, so how do all these winds and strings add up together, right? Here you're giving us some very low notes right in here with the tuba and contrabassoon, right? And like, here you're forming like very, very low harmonies, right? And the problem with low harmonies, especially with exposed notes on the contrabassoon, is that you start to get very complex overtones above, right? So, so for instance, like this A here, forming a minor third with the cello here and then the C below, that will definitely create some kinds of weird conflicts above. It'll the kind of buzzy sort of weird kind of a texture, right? So it's not without dangers. Flipping around a lot of the functions just to see if they will work can be pretty dangerous if you're trying to kind of stick with an impressionist approach. Like for instance, like right here, where you pretty much end up with an E minor chord. Like here you got G in the bass, but you got a E stroke in the timpani, right? And that people will hear that timpani stroke more than they will hear anything else, right? So if you were intended to keep this as a G6 chord rather than an E minor 6/3 chord, then this really cancels that out, right? So this definitely turns it into E minor, just because of the weight of a timpani stroke, even though it's not the highest. It's not the lowest pitch. So yeah, and then here, like, there's yeah, like it's the melody is just kind of going a lot of places. This up here is not really supported by a wind player. Like you've got the violins up here all by themselves, and then you've got the violas an octave lower being doubled by oboes, and yeah, and then so it doesn't quite add up. And then like right in here you've got like a more cohesive kind of a wind scoring here, and some other stuff happening here. I mean, I like the sort of late commentary here by the second violins. I think that's pretty cool. But seeing as how like this area is sort of being stomped on, like there isn't any kind of space in the register, right? Because it's jumping up to this A, right? And then you have the same thing playing again with this pitch going higher. So it doesn't really it's hard to pick out the two different voices that you've got going on in here, right? But I can't fix every problem in the limited time that we have, but I'm just going to cover some of them. Then here you have a glockenspiel happening here, and then at the same time, like as this beautiful clarinet thing is going on, there's no marking here, right? So we don't know how loud the clarinets are, and since Sibelius doesn't have a clue either, it just plays them back at mezzo forte, right? Which you'd think, well, okay, mezzo forte, that'd be pretty loud when you consider that the glockenspiel is a very soft instrument, and you have timpani down here and so on, and it's piano, and we have these lower brass. But such are the power of the overtones of the lower heavy brass is that they tend to bury everything that's happening above in terms of its quality of timbre, right? So I mean, you can hear that something is happening here, but you can't really hear the quality of it, right? So like if this were like lower strings, this would be absolutely gorgeous. But the fact that it's lower brass, you could just really hear that the overtones are they're just really, and then when you come in here with the first trombone, playing this forte right in here, and then the other instruments join it. The other lower brass instruments join it at forte, the trombones. It just basically kills these, it just kills them what's happening here dead. So there's no smooth connection between the clarinets here to what the trombones are doing. So it really is kind of really like I was saying at the beginning of this evaluation session, it really is kind of like splotches of color stuck together, right? They're not really necessarily interconnecting or following each other. Yeah, I mean, it's like, I mean, there are really cool ideas in here, don't get me wrong, but like, you know, like right in here, this could almost work the way things are set up, but then you've got this harmony just like sort of piling over into a place where the motion is so important. Da 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 ba ba ba. You know. Yeah. Just a little word of advice: if this is happening in the piano score, but there isn't anything happening in the middle of the bar, you don't need to preserve that, right? You could just turn that into a dotted value with a tie, right? A dotted whole note with a tie. So that's really what should be happening here, not this tied to that. I mean, would you want to read that as a pianist, right? The only reason why it's tied in the piano score is like because he like really is trying to make sure that you're holding on to it while you are playing it, and it's probably completely unnecessary, but it's just a way of keeping the scoring relevant. It's, you know, sort of similar to what you might see, you know, the way you might see a tie handled in like a book of fugues or something like that, or some other kind of polyphonic writing, right? You know, or more like an organ score or something like that. But it really isn't necessary at all, right? This just could be tied. All right. Probably the biggest fly in the ointment really is this piccolo right in here, right? It's just like, what does it really add? It just kind of makes things a little shrieky, right? And then there's kind of a general lack of any slurs anywhere, right? There's nothing, you know, usually I've been bugging people about like putting in slurs that are too long or slurs that are kind of a reflection of what was in the piano score. But here I'm seeing almost none whatsoever, right, on this first page. So, you know, what connects? Certainly these triplets, shouldn't they be slurred? So that they're all kind of taken under one breath, or, you know, by the second flute player? Yeah, but a lot of this is just really out of balance. So you just really have to be careful putting pitches in really close proximity with each other, like the oboes, the English horn, and the you know, like really close by your trumpets and so on, and your horns. It just basically, you know, they kind of get blotted out. And then especially with you have this kind of aggressive pushing forward of a harmony that isn't part of the scheme in the next bar. Just, you know, by the time we get to the end of this, the audience is so distracted, the listener is so distracted, they have not been paying any attention to the way that you've worked all this out, right? All right. Now, going on to the next page here, we're seeing some slurs coming back, and Celesta, and so on, and yeah, I mean, I might make these slurs a little shorter, like, you know, even as much as slurring from here to there and then slurring this, or like having each beam group be separately slurred, right? But this is nice. Like, I approve of this. That's really cool. I mean, all of this could be played under one bow. It's not bad. It's just, you know, shorter bows on double basses. I don't like to give them anything that's too long. You know, just they have the most control. Like when they have like plenty of room on the bow in which to slur, right? Rather than just using up the entire bow, and every new pitch gets a very, very small amount of bow length. Yeah. Okay, so my big problem with this was just how out of balance everything was. Like, you know, I just felt that the harp vibes and celesta were so loud, right? That they just, like, we couldn't really hear any of the subtleties. Yes, you know, these parts do need to be marked a little louder, maybe mezzo piano or mezzo forte, but forte, and especially in the registers that they're in, you know, you got to use your ear, right? If you listen to your mock-up, you know, not to say to use a mock-up as a guide, but, you know, you could probably hear in the mock-up that it was that this was just clanging and bashing around in the middle here, and like the important parts are just really invisible, right? Yeah, and here, like, you're starting to push your horn higher and higher, while you're pushing your second flute lower and lower, right? So it's a place where, just like I mentioned previously, low flute scoring, pushing it all the way down to G here, and expecting it to make a meaningful contribution to the texture is probably not happening, right? I mean, and here you got oboes; they just pooped out, they're gone. This line right here could have been played by first clarinet or second clarinet, and and then it would make much more of a difference to the beautiful color that you'd be able to get here. Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't score this all under one breath. Maybe score this bar and then this separately articulated. Just because like the separate articulation goes with the drop of the pitch and the change of the embouchure, right? It's just a little easier. I would say the same thing for bassoon for different reasons, or I mean the same reason, but it's a different physical context, a different shaping. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that starts to get going here that is really, really cool. And then once again, like the piccolo comes in here, and it's kind of hard to. It's so, like these pitches are very, very high, and it's hard for them to, it's hard for them not to dominate everything that's going on below it. And so, like, it sort of covers the fact that you've dropped out in your brass, and there isn't a sense of continuity here, right? So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things going on in this score, and I feel that like you had a really ambitious plan with this, Brandon, and I mean, I take my hat off to that. I admire that. I think it's a really wonderful thing. But I think that like building on where you are already strong, and I seem to recall. I'm thinking of like the last couple of entries. I seem to recall you having like a really nice sense of like chamber music color. And like it's like, sorry, it's just of the thousands of pieces of music I've looked at over the past 3 years, I'm trying to pick out my impressions of what you were doing back then. Yeah, and I think I think that like building on that, right? It just like before you take on too many different things, too splashed out and stretched out, and kind of sort of like splashes of paint. You know what I mean? Like look at all the difference. I mean, if you just look at the different concentrations of notes on the page, right? You see a lot of like gaps. Like this totally dropped out. This is dropped out. This is dropped out in here. There isn't a sense of slowly collecting, merging, strengthening in the score. It's more like a little bit is happening here and a little bit is happening there, right? So try to get like a more integrated texture across everything. And I would say like a lot of the scores just in this set of evaluations would be really good for developing that. I mean, see, like go back and look at Nicholas's entry, right? Nicholas is has a very integrated approach, and then Max's before that, or Max's after that, and then some of the ones we're going to be checking out in a minute, and also check out some of the entries that are dropping right now from the Patreon supporters who orchestrated the entire thing all the way through, right? So just build on some of that. Be careful about a kind of a random approach, right? And I hate to use the word random. It's like the word arbitrary, right? It seems to imply that I don't think that you know what you're doing. Well, I mean, I think that like definitely your orchestration is a work in progress, right? But it doesn't mean that you don't have a plan and that you don't have like some instincts and some and an ear for certain things, right? But it's just that you need to build on where you're strong, right? So this might have been just a slight bridge too far in some ways. All right, so just watch out for that, but definitely do not quit, do not give up. I really want to see what you were going to do with next year's entry. Okay, absolutely, or next year's challenge, because I think that might be more in your wheelhouse, of all things. All right. So but like, taken all together, like if I could go through all of this and fix everything, but maintain the kind of strange colors sort of splashing against each other, then I think it would actually sound really cool. But I'd have to do a lot of work in balancing things. Okay. Anyways, but all the same, like, there were some really interesting things in this. So, so that really kept my attention and kept me focused, and just made my ear continue to think and my mind continue to think of ways that I could make things work better, could strengthen certain things to bring out certain effects. But then, would that still be your orchestration is the question, right? All right, so anyways, thanks for the cool entry, Brandon. Now on to the next score. And another really cool score. Um, all right, so like, I just wanted to make a couple of comments before I turn back, and that is, I mean, I really like the way that you have an overall strategy with your texture, like I was saying, and an integrated type of scoring, and yet you trade off with different sort of featured colors, with like mutes, and then and then you have this sort of little trombone solo like part, and then you've got like the harp right in here, and then tuba and so on. And I'll have some comments about how to make all of this stronger. All right, but but I mean, just some really cool ideas in here. And I like that. This is the first quintuplet that I have seen in these entries, so that is worth something, right? So now let's start at the beginning here. All right, so muted violins, but you're not muting the violas and the cellos, right? So yeah, I would say that's a bit of a risky kind of an approach. Right? I think they should all be muted, and the reason for that is just a kind of so that the colors match, right? When you're getting close together and you're working together in these patterns and so on. The double basses don't really need to be muted. They kind of already have a bit of a muted sound, just like because they are viols, right? They're not bass violins. They're not bass cellos. They are bass viols. So they have they're the way that they sound, like their their overtones spectrum and so on is sort of shaped a little differently. Sometimes the instrument builders will try to build double basses to be like bull fiddles, right? To be like to have more of a kind of a to be maybe a little brighter, like a cello or something. Yeah, and maybe a little bit bigger in different proportions. All right, but like I think that they should all be muted, right? Perhaps that is just an omission. All right, now you're using the buzz roll very liberally, right? Now you might be able to get away with that in percussion playing, You know, like the person might sort of like think, ah, okay, I get it. You know, this is a Sibelius thing and so on, and I've seen it in other parts where it doesn't really quite, doesn't really quite fit what I'm doing, but it's cool. But I don't think that there will be very many string players who will understand the buzz roll, unless they have run into a score like yours before, right? So just use, just use a kind of a standard triple beam tremolo. Well, that's all you need, right? That looks right, right? This doesn't. Okay. And the other thing too is what is a buzz roll? It means when you use the like kind of a gravity bounce from either stick alternated, right? And it gets instead of the the really cool like sped up paradiddle kind of sound, you get like the this kind of like a but sped up really really fast, right? So that gives it more of a buzzy kind of a sound. Therefore, buzz roll, right? But you wouldn't want to use it on a suspended cymbal because there's no bounce in the same way. It's like there isn't a membrane that is bouncing the stick back to you, right? That's why it's harder on the wrist, right? To there's no response, right? I mean, to a degree there is, but it's not the same as a membrane kicking the tip of the snare stick back to you, right? All right. So that's one notation thing to think about. And another notation thing is Alexander, have you missed my my tip on orchestrationonline.com about not using rolls with the arrows on them unless there is an alternate? I'm not seeing any down arrows. Are there any down arrows in this entire orchestration? I don't think so. So if there are no down arrows, there's no need to put in an up arrow, right? Because we know that the standard roll mark is up, right? That is just the way that it works. It rolls from the bottom to the top. So that is the default, right? Just to jump over here, this is the default, not this, right? Is it arpeggio up, right? Arpeggio. So it's the same thing. It rolled from bottom to top. Okay, so yeah, just really don't throw in because the worst thing that could happen. It's really not such a big deal. The worst thing you could do is just kind of be wasting the player's time, right? So it's they'll look at the up arrows and they'll say, "Oh, geez, is there a down arrow somewhere that I missed?" And they'll look at the score and they'll just go, "Oh, well, all right, okay, fine." Okay, I think that what you mean is this, right? To roll across 3 pitches. Rather than just rolling on an interval is just ding. That would be more of a grace note, right? So yeah, so just how long are these, right? Are they that long? So think about them a little bit more, all right? Then here you have bisbigliando dolce. Bisbigliando is something that has to happen between 2 alternating hands or fingers, right? So going and it is an incredibly soft sound. You may have missed my other tip where I talk about how it's very, very quiet. All right? Now, there is no way that this can ever possibly compete with this. Right? You have the same exact thing happening with 2 different instruments. The violin at piano, how loud do you think the harp is going to be? It's going to be triple piano. It is very, very quiet. What does bisbigliando mean? It means whispering. So, so you've got you got your violins going, yeah, and what your harp is doing is going, hey, by the way, I'm playing this thing over here, right? So you are not going to be able to hear this. I don't care what the mock-up says, you're not going to be able to hear this even as a gentle background sound. And you're not helping things by having your clarinets playing mezzo forte in here. Then you've got your bassoons playing mezzo piano and your flutes also playing mezzo forte. How is this poor bisbigliando supposed to be heard? Bisbigliando should only happen when the rest of the orchestra is so soft. It's just incredibly soft. And even then, at the most, you're going to hear this just background sort of twinkling sound, right? It's sort of like, it's like the pin dropping. It's that kind of level, right? All right, so just think about all those things. All right. So now let's talk about the scoring, just more like what things are happening and how well they work. Okay, so we got two flutes, two clarinets. Which one is which? Is this first flute? Is this? Shouldn't you tell me this? Right? Just in general, I'm not seeing, any information about who is playing when and where. Right? So you have to tell us. Or, hey, if both of these are playing, shouldn't it be like this? Right? Shouldn't you tell us with two? Right? You've got to include that information. All right, but I'm just going to assume when I see a single voice that it is a single instrument, right? Rather than a duet, a two. Okay, so all right, so flute and clarinet in octaves. Okay, along with really, really soft viola and cello. And second violin playing this right in here. So look, the problem here is that you have piano crescendo to mezzo piano in your melody, and your support, the harmony below, is so soft that it doesn't really support very well, right? I mean, yeah, you got some of those pitches here in your harp, and that's all fine. And you got it at mezzo forte and so on. And I can see what you're doing. You're trying to showcase your harpist and so on. But like in terms of the balance with what is happening in the background, you have a lot of background foreground type of thinking. This isn't really going to support that very much, right? I mean, yeah, you're trying to keep it out of the way, but you could keep it out of the way if everybody were playing piano and this were mezzo forte, right? There's still some cool effects. I really love this right in here, and I think this is so cool. This finger tremolo, it's very nice. Yeah, interesting structures, and like I kind of request, like you are progressing the texture. You are finding new things to say. Now, I'm not certain that they always always leads to B. Emotionally. Do you know what I mean? Like, does this hand off to this, right, in a clear way? Is it really kind of telling us a story, or is it sort of jumping back and forth between different, different pictures, different visions of texture and sound and so on? Are certain things built in that are more showcasing other things, like the glissando here in the harp, right? Is that, And then, right here, this trill in the bassoon, I mean, you can hear it in the mock-up, how, that is not a subtle sound. It doesn't have the same sort of kind of fairies dancing on the head of a pin sort of a sound that the violas do. It has this sort of, it sort of has a slightly gargling sound, right? I mean, and that's the same exact thing from horn. I love a good horn trill in the right place. But it's, I feel that in terms of, like, lower winds, maybe except for very low bassoon trills and some bass clarinet trills, like certainly when you start getting into the middle of the staff and then the upper staff, your tenor register and so on, it just really has that kind of increasing tension sort of a sound. And I say the same thing for horn trills. As horn trills and brass trills in general, they have a way of just really increasing the tension. So I don't necessarily see how this is helping this, right? So if this were intended to underline this, then I don't think it is working. And since you have muted, well, I don't know what it is. Since it's violas playing against bassoons, the bassoons, even though they're softer, they're still going to win this fight easily, right? Just because they have all those overtones on top of them. All right. All right. All right. So about the only objection that I've got in here about like piccolo coming in and the harp coming in here is an interruption of the linear quality here. Like, like what we have a job to do here, right? Da 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 bum 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 ba da 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 da. It's like the whole middle meaning right in here. Is there a continuity going through of that function, right? Does it, in places where the listener can really pick it out, right? So you just have to really watch out for that. As experimental as some different parts are, and hats off to you for that. I think that's great. Like a slide grace note and so on, things like that. It's just question is like, how well does it hold together? How well is how much continuity does it have leading the entire idea forward? Yeah, and some things seem a little strange, like mezzo forte, diminuendo to piano, and you go up, and then all of a sudden you're mezzo piano, and just some of the dynamics in here are just a little strange. And then mezzo piano, and then suddenly you're mezzo forte crescendo to forte. Well, this is diminuendo, and then you have this piano note here at the end. So like the balance is just very strange. A lot of these parts don't necessarily there isn't like a unity of intention in a lot of the dynamics, right? And that is further affecting the continuity of the melody as it works its way through all of this, right? And then here, like, you're going down, like, this oboe note is being held forte, right, to the end of the middle of the bar. And then you have this mezzo piano note in trombones, which are not a soft instrument, lasting to the middle of the bar. And meanwhile, you have these strings just dying down to triple P. So I'm just kind of not sure if everything all adds up together. Do you know what I mean, Alexander? I mean, like that, like imagination to the hilt is like that is a gorgeous, gorgeous thing, right? So it's just a question of proportions and continuity, right? So just like watch out amidst all of these amazing calculations and different different concepts, like a different one every 2 bars, really, of how the texture should go, whether or not there is an overall, whether the melody really does lead to the next thing, and whether or not there's a kind of a unity of purpose when you come to a cadence. You know what I mean? That's I think that's a really important thing. All right, so so now in here, like, I actually felt that the continuity was much, much better. I mean, there's still some irregularity in here, like really loud oboe and so on, but like that is sort of part of your kind of, you have this general kind of a purpose in here, like so let's just take apart the different obvious stuff, right? So here you've got your melody. I don't think you need to fade in from triple P to make a point here. Bum 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 bum. Right. And then, interpreting the left-hand patterns and so on. This is a little fiddly, the way that you've got the slurs, but I mean, they're all playable. I would slur this too. Yeah, so I mean, I think maybe, okay, so I would put this marking after I would put it in the expression text, and I would say salt, SALT period, saltando, right? Spiccato has a kind of a, I mean, is there a difference between saltando and spiccato? Like spiccato, like it almost has the connotation of a kind of aggressive leaping, right? At least how it's been described to me by pianists and string players, right? Well, I am a pianist and a string player, but whereas saltando is just like kind of a bouncy bow, right? And since you're only going up to mezzo piano, right? I think saltando. I mean, that really is no big difference between the two. Use either one, but I just feel like, I think of like spiccato as being like that really amazing part in the middle of the of the solo part of the Ravel's Piano Concerto for the left hand. That's spiccato, right? It just has like the most amazing aggressive leaping and bashing around. Whereas like this is more like subtle, right? This means I just feel saltando would be a better descriptor here. All right, so like just in general, like the overall shape of everything, it works pretty well. And then you have like these little protrusions, these little things like the flute and so on. But what I'm not seeing here is backing off quickly, right? So a lot of like you push into certain ideas, and then like right in here, and then you don't back out, right? You just kind of keep them, and I think that is hurting things, right? Like you should have a diminuendo coming out of this, right? And then this part right in here, mezzo piano, it should be more like piano by the time you get to here, right? Because this is just confusing things when you need to have more attention focused up here in the oboes, right? And then why keep the flute part so loud, right? When you want it more of a background kind of a thing, keep it, go and then diminuendo, right? And back to piano or mezzo piano, and then here you can bring this out a little bit, little crescendo, I would say, like crescendo and then diminuendo coming, and then same thing here, diminuendo right here, so that this doesn't stick, because you have these other parts. You've got this harp solo right in here, okay, and like if you want this harp solo to stand out, write it in octaves, split between the two hands. So like drop to a bass clef here, and then just copy paste this an octave higher onto the bass staff above, right? So it can be played with both hands, and then just once you get to here, jump back up to treble clef. But yeah, but like have the like that is how this will stick out, because just a single line itself with all of the junk that you have happening at the same time, you've got these offbeat. This bassoon staccato, you've got whatever this is in the cellos, right? You've got this doinking away down here. You've got some mid-range clarinet happening. That is all distracting from what's going on here in the harp. And to make matters worse, you've got the C trumpet coming in, right? Which is it still mezzo forte? Right, so this is just getting trashed. You haven't built a safe place for it, so you have to make it bigger in terms of like more notes, right? So I would just say like turn this into an octave thing. Okay, and this is all going to get swallowed. All of this lower harp stuff, it really does not have much of a chance against all of, and it's just distracting anyways. I was just like, wait until here, like maybe do some rolled chords like you have, and then have this harp solo. All right, so tuba solo. So we just have to talk about this. Like, here you have got this trombone solo, and it's got this beautiful slur on it and so on. And then here, this could be, ba-ba-ba-ba-bam. It could be more kind of trumpet-like. But here, like, do you really want this to be, ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba? Do you really want that kind of a sound, or do you want it more like this? Do you want a nice slurred sound? Because I tell you, tuba player can play all kinds of slurred stuff and sound fantastic. Like tuba has like a beautiful kind of a solo range, and this is just in a sweet register for the tuba. It's just everything's perfect. You're missing some slurs is what I would say. It'd be my instinct here, right? And if you're going to slur this, then you should slur this rather than having everything so separated, right? And then slur this too. Right, because like it just fits in with the other parts, right? With the other approaches that you're taking. I would slur this as well. Yeah. So So I mean, it's a fascinating page, because you do have an integrated approach, like I said before, like with the parts really working together. But then you've got these things that kind of surge out into the foreground, and that's really entertaining. It's not. It still needs a little work, right? So that's what I'm trying to help you with this, so that you can save it instead of throwing it away, right? I mean, my aim for this entire challenge is that like nothing would get thrown away entirely, right? So it would be more like a question of how can this approach work, right? What could I do if I need to change something? What needs to be changed in order for the approach to work? How can I make the approach better or professional or ready for the stands or whatever, right? So I still think that this needs a lot of work. I think you need to tell us who's playing when. I don't think you need quite so much contrabassoon. And you might not need so much trombone either, or excuse me, tuba either, right? But just like try to make your foreground moments a little bit, a little bit more proportioned, right? A little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of that, and so on, just like so that like things fade in and out, and they don't just stick around and create more havoc when other important parts are happening, right? And whatever you do, do not bury your strings under anybody else's glorious moment. Okay? But those are my thoughts on that, and just such a fun score, Alexander. Like, just challenging to my sense of complacency. When I feel that they're I've seen a lot of scores take a certain approach, a certain similar approach. Then this comes along, which is just all over the place in some ways, but very integrated in another. So really, really awesome. And speaking of which, we've got one more awesome score coming up before I finish off this video. So let's go take a look at it now. And now for our last score from Matthias. And Matthias, I love what you're doing in here with this alternating fingered tremolo in here. I think there are ways of scoring this so that you could have the kind of alternating tremolo. You could state them all as pitches that were alternated between. I don't know if you know what I mean, but it's like just you would end up with, say, like a dotted half note with this pitch alternating with a dotted half note with this pitch, and have a two beam tremolo floating between them, between the two stems, right? It just is a much faster way of writing this out than having every single pitch stated, right? But like the way that these are crossing is also really cool. Okay, well I'll have some more comments about how this all works and how to make it work better, right? But let's start with section A. Okay, so I think that this is all going to work fine. There's one little problem in that you don't have the G tied across here. You have the C tied across here. But then I think you miss a voice. Or if I'm just to refresh my memory really quickly. Yeah, see, so just solving the first problem with holding the G across here, but the second problem, even though you have this held C here, is that you don't have the sounding F sharp right in here, written G sharp, right? So like we lose a little bit of quality of timbre in here, and a little bit of harmony, right? So we need the extended G note here, and we need the sounding F sharp here, right? Which that all could be just supplied if you had another bassoon working alongside, right? And that could just jump in and supply some of those, and then just fade out of the texture right in here as you proceed. And like you solved a similar problem here with your first and second oboe, which I thought worked great. All right, so I mean, there isn't anything that doesn't really work here. I mean, I think it's all fine. You have a little crescendo and diminuendo. You don't need to mark piano here because we know that it's still piano, right? However, here you're saying crescendo and then diminuendo. That's left over from the piano score. But crescendo to what? You see, the pianist can decide how much crescendo and diminuendo to put in, right? Because that is one person playing one instrument, and that is all they're responsible for. But you have 4 or 5 people playing at once here. So can't you give them more guidance? And this person is coming in the middle of a crescendo. How loud are they supposed to be? They have no context whatsoever because their part will not include this part on it. They'll just say, oh, they're coming in here, right? So crescendo. If the crescendo gets to mezzo forte by the time you get to here, then shouldn't everybody be marked mezzo forte? So we know, that is what the second bassoonist is playing. Now here you don't have to say +2. You don't have to say that because we know that this is this is the second voice. There's the second bassoonist. You don't need to say +2. We know that's who this is, right? And here, here you're saying 1, but we know that this is 1. If you have this second voice rest there, we know that this is just the first bassoonist. However, you get rid of the first voice rest and just have a single player, then you do have to put in the number 1, which is what I would prefer. Okay? So you need a destination for this crescendo. How loud does it get to by the time you get to the middle of this bar or here, right? You could wait on the diminuendo to like the second beat. You don't have to have it right on the first beat. But I mean, other than that, like everything works. But then the question is this, like, how much of an emotional story are you telling with the same exact scoring all the way through the prologue? Right? It's almost like somebody is telling a story. They're saying, well, I got up this morning and the sun had still not risen, but I had this feeling sort of came over me of living in this village in Ukraine and my life and its bittersweet qualities and and my hopes of being a great pianist someday or whatever. Whatever the story Barvinsky might have been thinking of. So how do you tell the story? How do things shift emotionally to follow the melody if we're in the same instruments all the time and the dynamics are pretty much the same, right? You have some nuances here. You have a bit of a crescendo here, but we're not told how big that is, right? So how do we tell this story? Is it possible that you could progress the emotional quality, the emotional story, by progressing the texture itself, by changing over some of the just feeling like a very natural progression from one kind of a textural approach to something that adds on or changes or whatever that like shows us a different kind of mood or color, right? And that's made all the more urgent because, as you see, you take almost the same approach again in the next part. See, so it's not a question like, I'm not questioning your ability to orchestrate here. You have some very great ideas. But it's more that since it's the same information again, right? Flute on top, oboe is the next voice down, like playing the octave, and then we have like clarinets, like it's the same exact pitch right here at the beginning, right? And then the same exact pitch with both bassoons now, and we've got some harmony happening here with our horns and so on. So essentially, this color is the same. We're adding these flurries in the background, which are beautiful, and the harp and so on, and the pulsing double basses below. But I mean, could a story have been told here at the beginning through the shifting of color and more liberal use of dynamics? Could we have changed the context, right, from early morning to sunrise, right? Or from a sense of being bittersweet to a sense of being optimistic, right? Just by the choice of different characters to the texture. Now, moving on here, you have built a problem into your score, which I mentioned in other scores. All right, and you if you have been listening to this lecture by now, you'll probably already be thinking, oh no, I scored my second flute part quite low, and it's just will be absorbed into everything. And especially if you have doubled, or unison oboes right here, A2 oboes, along with the second flute. Well, who will we be able to hear the second flute at all? It might add just a tiny bit of color shading to the oboes, but it really won't contribute very much. And as we go along, we can see that the flute gets all the way down to E here, right? So that is something that it's just contributing almost nothing to the sound. Whereas if you're going to have A2 oboes here, why not A2 flutes above, right? And then you have a better balance, right? Because you have one flute on top here, right? And you have three wind instruments doubling the next pitch down, right? And then the harmony is being taken up just very, very strongly by everything else. The horns and and the lower winds and everything, they are strong, right? They have power. So this top note has very little, right? Especially as you're withholding any kind of strings doubling the melody, right? Which is fine. Now, there's another factor here in your approach, and that is that you're leaving out notes, right? You are transcribing directly the left-hand pattern on the bottom staff of the piano score right onto your harp. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but perhaps you missed my warnings in the pitfalls video that it was really important to listen to the continuity of the left-hand patterns, right? And that means that these gaps are completely unnecessary. Just because they are in the lowest staff doesn't mean that is what the left hand is doing of the pianist. The left hand of the pianist is coming up like this and then hitting the thirds and then playing this part and then hitting thirds and then playing this part. So what that creates in the listener's mind is the sense of a beautiful continuity of a line that continues on, even though there are rests written in the staff. Those rests are that's just a gap where the left hand is playing part of the middle voice, but that part of the middle voice is also a part of the continuing left-hand pattern, right? So how could you solve this problem? Just put an E right here and a D right here, right? So those are parts of the, this sounding E, right? And then this D here, and then you have a beautiful flow all the way across here. There's just one long continuous stream of notes that doesn't have to stop. It doesn't have to turn into like a little waltz. Rest, doot, doot, rest, doot, doot, We don't need the rest. Messes with our sense of, turns. It just puts a little waltz in the middle of where it should be a beautiful continuous flow of notes. And, if we look at your scheme here, like continuing on, I'm assuming that all of these winds are supposed to be piano because you haven't marked the beginning of this passage, right? This is a new passage. You should have all of the dynamics marked. What if you went diminuendo down to pianissimo here, and then you started fresh here with piano, right? And then here, the harp, I would mark mezzo forte and write even, maybe it's not a solo, but just like you want that part to come out, right? This is lovely right in here. These, bum, 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 bum. It's really, really nice. Now, the last problem is there are no slurs here. So do you really want it to be... Then I think you really just do need to mark like détaché. Absolutely, because like this would work really beautifully if it were slurred, right? Just slur each beam group, right? Or yeah. I think that would work better than separate notes, but the separate notes could also work, and this could also be played portato here. So in other words, put tenuto mark on each note, and then each beam group slur, right? So you get you get a bouncing kind of a stroke here, so it pulses more. And then the last problem here is it's entirely too soft. I think that pianissimo would work fine. I think you want this kind of almost like fairies dancing in the background. You get sort of similar to like Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream overture, right? You just want that kind of light, airy touch, and being so incredibly soft, it just doesn't really make much of an audio impression, right? Like, I think at the very least I would just start at pianissimo rather than triple P, right? But even at piano, like if all the parts were piano except for the harp, which would be louder, if all the parts were piano, I think it would still blend beautifully. You should try that out with your mock-up. Yeah, see? Look at this beautiful line right in here. And you don't have to stop here, right? You could incorporate some of these notes into the triplet and just keep the harp going. Why can't the harp go B, D, C sharp? Or excuse me, C, not C sharp. Or it could go B, D, and then play this an octave lower, play this C, or even lower down here so that it connects better with this, and then get rid of these rests, just like I said before. Right? And so on. But look, two oboes are going to be playing this same E, right? And you know who else is going to be playing that E? Is your first horn, right? And sounding E, which will be so powerful that the second flute player could just pretend they're playing and nobody could tell the difference. Anytime that happens in a score, you might as well just have the player play a different part. Right, and that's what I think should happen here. All right, well, it's pretty much the same approach throughout, so there isn't a lot new to say till you get to B. But that's where I have to stop. Just a few little words of advice. I don't know if you're using MuseScore or what application, but generally speaking, you should have a bracket at the beginning that covers all of the winds, and then another bracket that covers all of the brass, and then a bracket that covers all of the strings, right? And then each of those brackets should also be reflected in the bar line. So the bar line should be just as long as the bracket, right? So this should be one bar line, one solid bar line, and then this should be one solid bar line, just like in the harps. And then this should be one solid bar line, okay? And it's just much, much easier to read than all of these sort of split apart staves, right? That gives it a shape. It's almost like having a paragraph having boundaries on either side of the page, right? Rather than having like solid straight margins on both sides, rather than just sort of being random, sort of starting and ending in random places. And that just makes it so much easier to read and immediately pick out what part is doing, which instrument is doing what part, and so on. And it just makes it easier on me too, which is very helpful. All right. So very cool score, Matthias, and I especially liked this in here, and it would be nice to know if it really were intended to be played détaché or slurred. I think I vote for slurred. Maybe other people out there could put in a vote. And then I think that this would just work great with portato, just having that pulse, that kind of bouncing pulse from below, rather than just, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth with the bowing. All right. But yeah, just, a really lovely score. So, and I'm just kind of wondering, sort of thinking ahead and wondering about next year's challenge, how you might approach that score. It might be really something that really appeals to you. I think I'm guessing. It might be something that was really, you just might think, oh man, I could dig my teeth into that. I know exactly how everything should go. So I look forward to that possibility. And with everybody else in this challenge as well. And I want to thank you all for your great scores, your great efforts. Whether you were having a problem with one part or another, or whether I asked for more than you were expecting me to ask in one part or another, it doesn't mean that I value any one entry over any other, and that I don't respect you all equally, and that I'm not equally happy that you all entered. I think that it was just this has been such a wonderful challenge throughout, and this particular collection of scores is a really exemplary of, just of the just the wonderful quality of imagination and exploration and freshness, and it doesn't matter what level somebody's at, whether they are at a pro level or at just a beginning level. Just the intensity of imagination and joy that people are putting into these entries is such an inspiration to me. So thank you all so very, very much. And there will be one more video of the remaining 4 entries for the website subscribers. Thanks, everybody. See you really soon.